Good evening. My name is Keith Cole, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Wolf River Conservancy. I want to welcome you tonight to our virtual lecture on one of our favorite topics, hummingbirds, to be presented by Cyndi Routledge. Our presentation tonight is part of our ongoing educational outreach to the community. And Kathy Justice, our Director of Education, leads all of our educational outreach to the community in a variety of projects, such as tonight's lecture. We also want to acknowledge our presenting sponsors for this year's lecture series. Buckman is our corporate sponsor, and the Crawford Howard Family Foundation is our foundational sponsor. And of course, we'd like to recognize all of our benefactors, our 2022 benefactors, which include AutoZone, Brother International, FedEx, Hyde Family Foundation, International Paper, Jim Karras Subaru, Reen Container Technologies, and Selvamo for all their ongoing support throughout the year. All of our supporters, of course, corporations, community organizations, individual donors, and volunteers such as yourselves are critically important in allowing us to continue to deliver on our mission, the protection and enhancement of the Wolf River and its watershed as a sustainable natural resource. And of course, any gift that you provide, financial gift, is always appreciated, no matter how large or how small. Tonight, during the course of the presentation, there'll be a link shared with you where you can make a safe online donation if you'd wish. And of course, you can always visit wolfriver.org to learn more about all of our activities or to donate safely online. Some housekeeping details. We ask that you do not attempt to record tonight's program. If you've registered, sometime next week, you'll get a link that will allow you to rewatch this program, the recorded program, and you can share with others then. Also, if you have questions during the program, we ask you to use the Q&A feature and not the chat box. Kathy Justice, our Education Director, will be monitoring those questions and will ask the questions at the end of the program. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our presenter to you tonight. Cyndi Routledge is a federal and state licensed master bird bander and CEO of Southeastern Avian Research located in Clarksville, Tennessee. In addition to her nonprofit work, working with hummingbirds, Cyndi conducts contract conservation work with the Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency. Cyndi has been the Secretary of the Tennessee Ornithological Society for the past 10 years and President of the Nashville chapter of the TOS for the last 6 years. She was a longtime volunteer bander with Bob and Martha Sargent's Hummingbird Study Group and works with the International Crane Foundation and the Wheeler Wildlife Refuge as a crane ambassador to educate the public and ensure the preservation of the whooping crane, one of the world's most endangered species of birds. Cyndi's first love in major research subjects has been hummingbirds, including the winter hummingbirds. She's banded over 13,500 hummingbirds since she began her research in 2014. Cyndi resides in Clarksville, Tennessee with her husband and fellow birding buddy, optometrist, Dr. Steve Routledge. They have 4 children and 5 grandchildren. Steve and Cyndi are avid birders and love to travel. Please help me welcome Cyndi to our virtual stage tonight. Cyndi, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back. I really enjoyed myself last year, and I'm glad to be back again for you. So let's get started. The subject, as you know, are hummingbirds. So let's hope, whoops, let's see if this is going to work. There we go. From the 2-inch bee hummingbird of Cuba to the giant hummingbird, starling size, I might add, of Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, and Argentina. Hummingbirds are unique and stunningly beautiful. Their inability to walk and their iridescent colors are trademarks of this diverse family of birds. The number of different hummingbird species right now stands at around 343. Hummingbirds have specialized flying skills, as you all know, that enable them to feed while hovering, to fly up and down, and to even fly backwards with ease. They're exclusively a bird of the Americas, meaning they're only found in North, South, and Central America. The largest concentration of these hummingbirds can be found in South and Central America. Here in North America, we have 16 species that we know that breed here. And you can compare that to Ecuador that has 132 different species. But today, we're mostly going to talk about this guy here. This is the Ruby-Throated Hummingbird. And the topic of my research, the top picture, that is the adult male, and below is the adult female. So this is the adult male. He weighs about 3 grams, which is about the weight of a nickel if you put a nickel in the palm of your hand. They're 3 inches from the tip of that bill to the end of that pointed black tail. Females and younger birds tend to weigh more and are slightly bigger. The heartbeat of a hummingbird is about 250 times a minute at rest. And when they're hovering in front of a flower, it can go up to 1,200 beats a minute. In relation to their body size, their brains are actually one of the biggest in the avian world. That's hard to imagine in that tiny little bird. But that brain has a total body mass of about 4% of that total 3 grams. So flight is essential to hummingbirds. And this is an X-ray of a hummingbird. And what this shows you is the breastbone that at the bottom there, or the keel. And that's what the flight muscles are attached to. And that makes up 25% of the body mass of this bird. Unlike other birds, except swifts, which is a distant relative to the hummingbird, they don't fold their wings to gain power and lift. They keep their wings stiff and they rotate them at the shoulder. So they have the appearance of rotating those wings in a figure-8 motion, and that is what enables them to hover in the air like a helicopter. So by doing that, they can gain both power and lift on both strokes, and they do this 60 to 80 times a second. And like I said, can go forwards and backwards and up and down, and they can do it at up to 40 miles an hour. All hummingbirds are characterized by their iridescent plumage, most especially the males. And here we have a picture of this. This is the same bird. And you can see that in one picture, it appears that he has a black throat. And then in the other picture, it appears that he has a red throat. Well, the brilliance and iridescence of the hummingbird plumage is not caused by pigment. In fact, if I plucked one of those red feathers and laid it on a piece of paper, it would actually look like a smoky gray. But the color is caused by layers of microscopic air bubbles that refract, reflect, and recombine the sunlight to actually produce the color that we see. So that's why when this bird was sitting in the sun with the sun on his throat, we can see that red, but yet when he was in the shadow, it looked black. And the males will use this color to signal other hummingbirds for defense of territories, for mating, and simply, in a simple toss of his head, he can turn that switch on and off and let everybody know that he's bigger and badder than the rest of them. So most hummingbirds, most people think that a hummingbird tongue, a hummingbird bill is hard and rigid, but it's actually soft and easily damaged. It has a high rate of blood flow to it, and it is sensitive to the touch of flowers. Let's go back. Sensitive to the touch of flowers, much like your fingertip is. And the other job that the bill does is there to protect the tongue, because the tongue is very highly specialized. And this is actually a picture, a magnification of a hummingbird tongue. And it has two grooves at the end that it splits and it's forked, and they have two grooves, and it looks like they're hollow tubes. And for the longest time, researchers thought that they sort of use those tubes like a straw. But in 2015, there was a study that was done in Connecticut, and they used super slow motion video that showed, in fact, that the tongue acts more like a micro pump. So that as a hummer approaches a food source, the tongue is squeezed flat, and it compresses and builds up potential energy from squeezing. And when it hits that nectar, those grooves spring open to their original tube-like form and draw in the nectar before being snapped back inside the beak, acting like a pump. And this happens about 15 to 20 times a single second, hundreds and hundreds of times a day as these hummingbirds feed. So I like to tell people to think of a sponge, and when you squeeze a sponge and put it in water and it sucks the water into it, that's sort of the way that a hummingbird tongue works. So another question that I get a lot is, how do hummingbirds sleep and where do they sleep? Well, typically a hummingbird finds a perch, grabs a hold of that perch, and tilts his bill slightly upward and locks his feet and just fluffs out a bit and goes to sleep. When it's really cold in early spring, and as we get into late fall and our winter hummingbirds, they have a very special adaptation that's called torpor. And you can think of torpor like mini hibernation. And this allows them to survive cold nights without having to eat, because their metabolism is so high that if they don't eat every 10 to 15 minutes, they could perish. So they go into this torpor-like state, and they lower their heart rate to a few beats a minute, and they lower their body temperature to around 40 degrees. Normally it's 105 to 108. And they rely on their body fat to keep them alive. And then in the morning, as the sun rises, it warms them up. And in takes about 30 minutes, they come out of that torpor-like state and they begin to shiver, and then they warm up and fly off and feed. This picture on the right is an actual bird that was in torpor. It had sort of slid through the night, and someone thought it was deceased overnight. But as they watched it, the bird started to shiver, came out of it, flew off, and came back and had its breakfast. So when it comes to reproduction, female hummingbirds are truly the workhorse of the pair. They do it all. And currently, we know that the ruby-throated hummingbird is the only species known to breed east of the Mississippi. Now, we use the Mississippi as a dividing line. There are some ruby-throats on the west side, but for all intents and purposes, we use that Mississippi as the dividing line. Ruby-throats have the largest breeding territory of all of our North American hummingbirds. This is a hummingbird nest. It's about the size of, that's a quarter. You can see it's about the size of a quarter. It's made of spider webs, lichen, mosses, and filled with fibrous material. And it's the female who builds this nest. She will go and gather individual pieces of spider silk and come and stand on the branch, wrap it around, and begin to build the nest from the bottom up. And as she builds it, she'll get in the middle of it and she'll do a little dance and make the little cup. And then when she gets it just the way she wants it, she'll go and she'll pick off pieces of lichen from trees and branches and bring it over and camouflage this nest. The most unique thing about a hummingbird nest, besides the fact that it's the size of a walnut and it's so small and so precise, is that it stretches and it will grow as the baby hummingbirds grow. Usually you'll find a nest on a downward sloping branch, just like in this picture, at the bottom of a canopy, anywhere from 3 feet to 60 feet high. And she will place it where she feels she will have the most success in fledging her young, because after all, that's the whole purpose of her building this nest, to continue the species and produce more. But they don't always follow all the rules, and because they didn't read the book, and sometimes they build them in kind of funny places. So this is an actual nest that was built on a chain a porch swing. Apparently this bird liked the underneath the eave of the porch, and she put her nest right there. This one is my all-time favorite. She decided to put a nest on a wind chime. And I like this picture because you can actually see the spider webbing and how she has attached it to this wind chime. Sometimes you might find them around your shop, and this particular bird built this nest inside a alcove of a shop where there was a light hanging on an electric cord. And last year in Paris, Tennessee, a host called me, and she had found a hummingbird nest on a little battery-operated light fixture that she had on a passway between her screened porch and her kitchen. And that we were able to really get a good look at that nest there because it was accessible. And there it is. If you look on here on the right, are the 2 little eggs inside that nest hanging on that light fixture. Ruby-throated hummingbirds, all hummingbirds, lay 2 eggs, 1 or 2, never more than that. And they lay them 2 days apart. The eggs are about the size of a tic tac or a black-eyed pea. And unlike other songbirds, your bluebirds, your cardinals, your goldfinch, who lay a whole clutch of eggs and then sit and begin to incubate, so they all hatch at the same time, hummingbirds will begin to incubate that first egg upon laying it, and then 2 days later will lay that second egg and continue incubating. So this is a female hummingbird sitting on her nest. These 2 pictures, again, it's that light fixture in Paris because we were able to observe her through the kitchen window. And this other one is actually in my own yard. I was lucky and found a nest back in 2020. She'll sit on that nest about 80% of the day, only leaving briefly to feed herself and then return. She'll incubate those eggs for anywhere from 12 to 16 days. And to allow her to sit on the nest for long periods of time, she does reduce her body temperature, which reduces her need for calories. And that enables her to sit there 80% of the day. Also, because they're sitting on these nests 80% of the day, in late May and early June, I always hear, well, where did my hummingbirds all go? I haven't seen any hummingbirds. Well, that's why, because these females are busy sitting on these nests 80% of the day. So they're not hanging out at your feeders as they do in the fall or the early spring when they're in migration. They're busy. They're busy reproducing and having babies. So this is the actual picture of those 2 little Paris birds in that nest. Tiny little birds about the size of bumblebees when they hatch. They're black, as you can see. They're blind, and they only have a few little feathers on them. And they're pretty helpless. And so mom has to provide everything for them. So these are those same birds in that same little nest a few days later. You can see their eyes are still closed, but they're beginning to get more feathers. and get bigger. They're taking up more of that space. Here they are a couple of days later, even more pin feathers are starting to appear. They pretty much double their weight about every 2 days, and that's because mom feeds them this wonderful slurry of insects, that's the protein, and nectar, that's the carbohydrate, and she'll regurgitate that right down into the baby birds. And it's the humming of her wings as she approaches the nest. They'll pop their little heads up and open their mouth, and then she can feed them. So this isn't the same pair. This is another pair of baby birds, but you can see as they're starting to fill up that nest and get bigger and stick up their little bills, their eyes opened a few days later. And these are two young hummingbirds nestlings that are approaching the 21 days. Hummingbirds, baby nestlings stay in that nest for 21 days. That's a long time. Most warbler species fledge between 12 and 15 days. Cardinals a little longer than that. Bigger birds a little longer, but hummingbirds stay in the nest for a long time. And one of the reasons that they stay in the nest for a long time is because we know they can't walk. So they can't walk out of the nest. They can't hop to the ground like a cardinal would and hop around and sit in a bush and beg and mom come down and feed them. They have to be fully capable of flight. And so the last week or so in the nest, you'll see them standing on the rim of the nest and practicing flying, building those muscles, and so they can fly and take off. When they fledge, the older one, the one that was the egg that was laid first, the one that was hatched first, will fledge first, leaving one behind. And usually they will make a flight to an adjacent tree. And there they'll stay in that adjacent tree in the different branches, practicing flying, getting stronger, and begging for food. And mom will feed them for about a week after they leave the nest. And we call that a natal tree. And once they leave that natal tree, then she doesn't feed them anymore. She doesn't teach them anything. They are on their own, totally on their own to find their food and migrate and do all the things that hummingbirds do. And they even become competition. Sometimes they'll follow her to a feeder and, they see the activity, but there's no teaching them as there are in some other species of birds. So, I'll go back again, sorry. Life as a hummingbird is hard. And so we know that only 1 in 5 of these birds born this year will live to see their first birthday. It's just the way nature is. It's not just hummingbirds, it's all birds. But if they do see their first birthday, these ruby-throated hummingbirds typically live anywhere from 3 to 6 years. We do have records of birds living 8 and 9 years. And that's just because we've banded them, and the last time we've caught them is at that point. But some other species of hummingbirds lived a decade. So it depends on the species. So every once in a while, I get a phone call and someone will tell me, I have the teeny tiniest little hummingbird visiting my patch of flowers. And it's got to be a baby, they say. And I tell them, well, I think what you have is a hummingbird moth, because remember, when babies fledge, they're the size of an adult. So when I hear teeny tiny, I right away think of a hummingbird moth, and they are often mistaken for small hummingbirds because they can hover. Their little proboscis goes in and out, and they feed on the flowers, just like a hummingbird. And if you watch them, they appear just like a hummingbird, but they are a hummingbird moth. And here in Tennessee, we have 6 different species of hummingbird moths. And if you've ever been lucky enough to see one, they're pretty amazing in their own right and kind of fun to watch. So now we're going to talk about hummingbird predators, because there's always a question. That's always a question, what got the baby hummingbirds, or why don't they all make it? Well, one of the reasons are predators. Adult ruby throats don't really have a lot of natural predators. They're pretty wise, they're pretty quick, they know what to do. It's the young, inexperienced ones that usually get nabbed. And some of the natural predators are snakes like this, small hawks, owls, praying mantis, large spiders, and larger songbirds, specifically corvids, your blue jays and your crows will take baby birds, baby hummingbirds. They'll eat the eggs or they'll take birds out of the nest. And those are all natural predators. And then there is an unnatural predator, and that are cats. Cats are not a natural predator. They are an invasive species, and we know that they kill 2.4 million birds in the US alone every year. So cats are wonderful when they're house pets inside, but when they get outside, they really can have devastating effects on nature, and they do. And folks will say to me all the time, there's no way my cat, he's fat, he's old, he couldn't get a hummingbird. Well, they do get them. Just talk to any rehabber and they'll tell you how many they see each year. So if you have an outside cat for whatever reason, think about placement of your feeders. Always hang them away up high where there's no way that a cat can lay in wait and get at a hummingbird. So now let's switch gears and talk about what I think is the most amazing thing about this little 3-gram bird, and that is their incredible migration story. First of all, if I had a nickel for every person that told me that a hummingbird migrates on the back of a goose, I would never, ever have to do a fundraiser again for my nonprofit. But that is a myth, an absolute total myth. People have also told me, no, they sit on the wing of an airplane, they ride on a boat. I mean, you name it and I've heard it, but no, they do it under their own power, all by themselves. And that is what is so amazing about these one of the amazing things about hummingbirds. So if we look at this map, you can see that the red shows the breeding grounds. We're talking ruby-throated hummingbird here. And this is the breeding grounds for the ruby-throat. And they've got to go from those breeding grounds down into the wintering grounds, down into the Yucatan Peninsula, which is green on this map. In the spring, it's a big, giant hurry to get from the green to the red because they are programmed to, their hormones tell them it's time to go, it's time to reproduce, got to get there, got a finite amount of time to do this all in. So I've got to take the shortest route and I've got to get there as quick as I can. So the shortest route is across the Gulf of Mexico. So ruby-throat hummingbirds make an 845-mile nonstop journey across that open water. It takes them anywhere from 20 to 26 hours. And once they get started, there is no stopping, because if you stop, you're in the water. They don't do it in flocks. They don't fly like ducks or geese. They do it solo. They do it by themselves. One of the biggest mysteries is what makes them launch off on what particular day to take this journey. It's something we're still trying to figure out. Is it the weather? Is it the winds? Or are they fat enough? Because they must double their weight and get fat in order to make the journey, because the fat is the fuel that enables them to do it. So they're going to launch off and they're going to set off for where they were born, because we know from banding that these birds are faithful to their breeding and their feeding grounds. And so they're going to launch off, they'll hit the coast. Some 24 hours later, they'll be hungry, they'll be tired, they'll rest, they'll be looking for food. And then if they were born in southern Canada, they have another 1,000 miles to go, stopping along the way, remembering where every patch of flower, where every feeder was along that way until they get back to where they were born. And for males to establish a territory, for females to begin building a nest and reproducing. So we touched on how they fly all those miles without starving, since they need to eat every 10 to 15 minutes. So, you know, it's not very efficient if you have to go up and down, up and down, up and down every 10 or 15 minutes. And so, like I said, it's they pack on the carbs, they get fat. And that's why they're so crazy at our feeders around migration time. We see it in the fall for the reverse journey. And that's because they need to get fat. Birds don't ordinarily carry fat because it's only extra weight. So when it's time to go, it's time to get fat, because again, the fat is the fuel that enables that journey. So they don't have to double their weight as they do to go over the Gulf in the fall. They can put on small amounts of fat, a gram or two, and make short distance flights using that fat. So you get a little fat, you maybe weigh 4.5 grams instead of 3, and then you fly 50 miles or 80 miles, and then you stop again, and you refurbish, and you refuel, and you get ready to go again. And that's what especially happens in the fall. It's not a big rush. It's more of a meander as you go. You sort of go, 50 to 100 miles and stop for a few days, and then you go again. I like to tell people that think of fall migration like a river, where there's birds in and birds out and birds in and birds out at your feeder until there's no more left to come. So since we mentioned feeders, let's talk about feeders. Please notice that the nectar is clear, the nectar is clean, and the nectar is not red. Red dye is harmful to hummingbirds. We know that for a fact, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Cloudy nectar means that it's going bad. You should be changing your nectar before it gets cloudy. And with the temperatures that we've been having lately here in my house in Clarksville, I've been changing my nectar out every day because I want that nectar to be clean. Sugar water grows bacteria very quickly, and that bacteria and fungus can make hummingbirds sick. So it's essential that nectar is kept fresh and clean. And feeders need to be kept clear of black mold. That black mold is a fungus. It can transfer to the birds. It coats their tongue, and will eventually choke them and cause them to die. So it's essential to keep those feeders clean. You'll hear me say it over and over. Clean feeders, clean, clear nectar, no red dye. So is there any proof that red dye is bad for hummingbirds? I mean, they sell it in the stores. So it is legal for it to be sold in the United States. It is red dye number 40, and the FDA has set limits for human consumption and recommends people not ingest large quantities of any single dye product. Okay, but when we feed a single dye to use it in our hummingbird feeders, we encourage hummingbirds to eat at our feeders. We're setting them up for a problem. And that's the root of the problem, because they are ingesting 17 times more than what the FDA says is good for a 180-pound man. Now, this is a 3-gram bird. So it's high concentrations of that. And it has been found to induce DNA damage, in humans and in mice. And yes, hummingbirds are not humans and mice, but it's not necessary. And so because we don't have definitive studies that say it's good or bad, don't use it. So err on the side of caution, and please don't use red artificial dyes. Make your own nectar. Here's two products that you can get on pretty much any shelf. You can see the red, you can see what's in it, you can see all the preservatives and the additives. Hummingbirds don't need all those preservatives and additives. And now, because this, we've been preaching no red dye for a few years now they're starting to make clear nectar. But if you look at it's got the same preservatives in it. They don't need it. Basically, I like to tell people, if you won't pick up that bottle, unscrew that cap and drink it, then please don't give it to your hummingbirds. And then they came out with stuff like this, things to extend the life of your nectar and things to feed, keep your food fresh, electrolytes. See, the industry is not regulated, and so anybody can make any claim. I say, don't use any of these products. Don't use anything, that you have any question to. Again, would you drink it? Would you add it to your iced tea or your water to extend the life of it? If you wouldn't, then don't feed it to your birds. So this is an actual hummingbird in my hand, and this is what you see when a hummingbird has been eating red dye. They eliminate or pass red. So what's it doing to their internal organs on its way through? I don't know, but we have had birds that this bird went to a rehabber because he wasn't well, and a few days on the correct food, and the bird was fine and released and went about its way. So just err on the side of caution and don't use those products. Again, clean feeders, a clear nectar is the way to go. And if that doesn't convince you, this is what happens when bees get into red nectar. Lots of people have been talking to me this year about bee problems. The bees are thirsty. It's been so hot. There haven't been flowers, when they're coming to our feeders. Well, this is what happens. When they get to into red nectar, the bees make red honey. Would you eat this honey? Would you eat this honeycomb? I don't think so. So what should you feed them? Your nectar should be 4 parts water and 1 part cane sugar. No honey, no raw sugar, no artificial sweeteners, just plain white sugar. Cane sugar is best because it melts the easiest. And if you drink your water, there's nothing wrong with your water, then it's fine for your hummingbirds as well. Change it frequently. Did I mention keep your feeders clean? I know I did, because I do over and over. No red dye, 4 to 1. And that ratio is adequate. It's about 18 to 20%, of carbohydrates for the birds. It's a good sugar ratio. Sometimes, if you put in a little bit more, that's not the end of the world. But as you get to raising that ratio, especially in hot weather or drought conditions, the lack of water in the nectar can begin to affect the kidneys of the hummingbird. So, so it's best to stick to 1 to 4. You don't have to measure it like your Betty Crocker. I just put a big 1 cup scoop in my canister of sugar and dump it in my water and mix it. My water comes out of my tap at 130 degrees, so I don't boil it. But if you feel like you want to start with a sterile solution and you want to boil your water, that's up to you. But if you're boiling it to keep it sterile, you need to know that 1 tongue in undoes all that. But there's no harm with starting with a sterile solution. It's up to you. It's just not necessary all the time. So I get a lot of questions about what's the best feeder. And my answer all the time, the very first answer is, the one that you can keep the cleanest. And to me, that means the one with the fewest parts. I will encourage you not to use metal feeders. They rust, and that puts iron into the nectar. And sometimes you can't see the rust because it's on the inside of the saucer. And so that puts iron in, and then that affects the liver and the kidneys of a bird. So it also gets hot if it's in the sun, and those little feet hit that hot metal. So I like to, they're pretty. Some of them are out there, they're awful pretty, but they're really not functional. So again, I like to recommend, the one you can keep the cleanest. That's the best one for you. But if you're really seeking advice about specific feeders, this is my new favorite feeder. It's by aspects. It's called the Hummingbird. They come in different sizes, from little 4 ounces all the way up to 16 ounces. It is a dish-like feeder. They're easy to clean. They're easy to fill. They're easy to view the quality of the nectar. As I said, they come in different sizes. The ant moat is built right in. They carry a lifetime guarantee. And if it's important to you, they are made in the US. You be careful where you get them, because there are imitations out there. And of course, then the lifetime guarantee won't be, there isn't one. I just, hummingbird.com, and they don't sell them there, but they can tell you where you can get them. I know you can get them at Wild Birds Unlimited and some other places like that. There's quite a few online places to buy them. They're not cheap, but they work. And the other thing that I have found this year about these feeders is bees. For the first time ever, I had an issue with bees. And they were coming to my other traditional feeders, and but they couldn't get to the nectar on these feeders, so they weren't swarming them, and the hummingbirds were still able to feed. And if you only fill these feeders up partially, a hummingbird tongue can get to the nectar, but the bees can't, and so they'll leave them alone. And so then, if you have a swarming problem, these help. So if you're looking for a recommendation, this is what I recommend. But if not, the one you can keep the cleanest is certainly adequate and will certainly feed your birds. So I get a lot of questions about ants. People have ants because, of course, ants are attracted to sugar and the sugar water, as the bees are. And so you heard me mention ant moats. Well, this is an ant moat, and it's simply a cup that hangs between the hook and the feeder. And you should fill it with clean, clear water. You need to keep it filled up. In this heat, it will evaporate very quickly. Also, other little songbirds look at it like they're personal drinking fountains, and they will land and they will drink out of it, such as this picture on the bottom. That's American Goldfinch, and they love it, as do other finches and downy woodpeckers and so on and so forth. Please only put clear, clean water in those ant moats. I've had people tell me they've filled them with insecticides and oil and all kinds of other crazy things. But think about it. If a goldfinch is going to land on it, you're going to poison or hurt that goldfinch. So don't. Clear, clean water in those ant moats. Now, they aren't 100%. Nothing's 100%. Ants are smart. They know how to bridge their bodies. And if you're not maintaining it and watching it, and it's early spring, the ants will bridge their bodies and somebody will walk over it and get down to your nectar. So it's all about watching your feeders and maintaining them and being aware of what's going on, not just hanging them out back somewhere and walking away and watching the birds come. So ant moats, that's what these are. You can make your own, you can buy them, and they're out there. I even use ant moats with my aspect feeders with the built-in moats. I look at it as a double protection. So I also get a lot of questions about water features people see on the internet, fountains where there's hundreds of hummingbirds visiting fountains, taking baths, doing everything. Most of those pictures are coming from out west where it's very hot and very dry. But here in the East, ruby throats would much prefer misters. If you've ever been out in your yard watering your plants and have hummingbirds fly through the water as you water your plants, that's what this mister does. There are many of them out there. This is my favorite because it just simply hooks on the end of my garden hose. And I even have it hooked up to a timer so that every day at 3 o'clock, the mister comes on and stays on for an hour, and there'll be birds sitting there waiting for it. The hummingbirds and other songbirds, they know it, that it's going to come on. They know they can fly through it. And that's what they do. They fly through it, then they sit on a branch and they preen. The residual falls on leaves in my pussy willow, and they'll get in a leaf, and a hummingbird will stand on a leaf and take a bath in the residual water from the mister. So you can get fountains if you want. If you're going to do that, make sure they're shallow so that a bird doesn't fall all the way in it. You don't want that to happen, a hummingbird to fall all the way. But this is so easy that it's fun to have. So if all of this is, it should all be very pleasurable. Feeding hummingbirds should be a pleasure. It should never be work. It should never be drudgery. We do it for our enjoyment. So when it no longer becomes enjoyable, then you know that you've either overdone it or maybe it's just too much for you. So what can you do to attract hummingbirds to your yard at that point? Well, plants. Natural native plants is always the way to go. And even if you're hanging feeders, you should always hang or always plant native plants as well to supplement. We're going to go on vacation, and then you don't have to worry about when you go away. You have the natural sources there. This is red buckeye. It's one of my favorites for spring because it blooms just about the time the hummingbirds are showing up at my place in Clarksville. And it's right there for them. It's a magnet, and in they come to feed on it. Another one that's blooming when they first arrive is this. It's native coral honeysuckle. This is great to grow over an arbor or on the back fence if it's in the sun, or, it's a natural attractant, and they just love it. Don't confuse it with trumpet vine. Trumpet vine is also, another good favorite of hummingbirds, but trumpet vine is invasive and it'll take over your world if you plant it in the wrong place. But if you have a back fence and you're just looking for something to grow in the back, trumpet vine is great. And then this is red cardinal flower. It's blooming now. If the drought hasn't gotten to it, it's a favorite of hummingbirds. And it's good for your garden. Monardia or bee balm is another favorite of a hummingbird favorite. And it also attracts butterflies and bees and all those other pollinators that will use it as well. Salvia is wonderful. There are so many different salvias out there. And notice this salvia is purple. It doesn't all have to be red or pink. They just have to be nectar producing flowers and plant native, because once they're established, you don't have to water them. Tropicals are good. You think, oh, I want to plant tropicals but no, plant natives. Natives are good. Salvia is good in containers in your garden. Different cultivars work. There are lots of suggestions out there. You can go to audubon.org and look for suggestions on native plants for your area. And they'll give you a list of favorites, and they'll tell you what birds like what trees, what shrubs, what perennials, what annuals. And it's a good resource. So this is just people always want to attract more hummingbirds to your yard. And many of these things we've already talked about. And I'll just go over them really quickly. Add new plants to your garden. You could never have too many flowers. Never have too many flowers. Plant a blooming schedule. This is one thing we didn't talk about. So you have flowers from spring, like the buckeyes, to first frost. You want flowers through the whole season. You don't want your whole garden to bloom in June and then have no flowers. So think of a blooming schedule. Think of, early bloomers, middle summer bloomers, and late bloomers. Don't remove the spider webs from around your windows and front porches, because remember, that's the main ingredient in a hummingbird nest. Add a mister and if you want to. And as I said, hook it up to a timer so you don't forget to turn it off and have it on, hours and hours. Make perches, sticks, zip ties, dowel rods. Hummers will use them to sit and preen. They do, commercial, there are commercial perches out there. And when I first saw them, I thought, oh, no way are hummingbirds ever going to use those, but they do use them. Use one of Bob Sargent's tricks was use surveyor's tape, pink or orange, and tie them to your bushes in late winter and early spring, and catch the eye of migrating hummingbirds, because once they stop at your place, they'll remember it and stop there again. Add more feeders. Yes, if you add more feeders, more will come, but be cautious here. Don't add more than you can properly maintain. That is key. Feeding hummingbirds should always be fun, and it should never be a chore. And finally, you're going to need to replace old and worn out feeders. They do, with the heat and the cold, they contract and expand, and they leak, and the color wears out, and so you'll need to replace them. And when you do replace them, make sure they're easy to fill and easy to clean. Did I mention keep them clean and clean nectar? But those are just a few of the things you can do to attract more birds to your yard. So here's a question. When should you take your feeders down? Grandma told me that I should take my feeders down on Halloween, because I put them up on April Fools, and I should take them down on Halloween when the ghouls come, fools to ghouls. Well, that is not necessarily what I want you to do. I would love it if you would keep up your hummingbird feeder year round and help me with my winter hummingbird research. This video here is a female Rufus Hummingbird and these videos were taken by a homeowner host in Nashville, Tennessee, Bill Taylor. And this bird was back for the second winter, and she spent 2 whole winters with Bill. When she first showed up in 2021, Bill called me, and we went out there and we banded her, and then she stayed around until April, and then flew off to we don't know where, but then she was back the following October and stayed with him again all winter, and finally left the 3rd week of April 2022. And this is a picture of her in the last snowstorm that we had in Nashville. And there she is feeding away on a heated feeder, because there are tricks to the trade, but I'd like to encourage everyone to help me with this winter research and think about leaving up at least 1 feeder all year round. Let me see if I can now remove it and get on with the program here. So this was Bill's original setup back in 2021, which is easy. If you get a bird, it's easy to just put a 40-watt bulb inside a utility lamp and to heat it. And he even went further and put a cover over it so it wouldn't short off, and he hung a thermometer so he knew how cold it was outside. And there's a lot of tricks if you get a bird. If you don't get a bird, it's not necessary to do all this, but if you do get a bird, and I hope you'll call me so that bird can be part of the winter research, I have all kinds of tricks that I can share with you about it. So these are a few of the winter birds that will show up in Tennessee. As we talked about, birds are efficient creatures and they don't do anything before they need to do it, and they don't need to do anything more than they need to do. So as our planet has warmed, or maybe forever, these western birds, these hardy birds that are born in the mountains in Idaho and Oregon and summer in Alaska, like this Rufus Hummingbird, will begin their migration journey in the fall, and they'll come down and they'll stop in the southeast. And if they can make a living, if they can find insects and they can find food in the form of nectar or late blooming flowers, they won't go down into, the Yucatan. They'll stop and they'll stay with us. And that is part of what my winter study is looking at. What species stay with us, why they're staying with us, and do they survive and do they return? And those are just some of the questions that we ask. And like I said, this is a Rufus Hummingbird. The one up in the right-hand corner is a bird that spent the winter in Paris. And then there's Bill's bird. And then there was another bird that was in Murfreesboro this past year. This Rufus Hummingbird is about 3 inches long. He commutes annually between Mexico and Alaska, and he has the longest one-way migration flight relative to body length of any bird in the world. He travels over 2,000 miles one way between his breeding grounds and his feeding grounds, wintering feeding grounds. This is a black-chinned hummingbird, and this is the second most abundant species in the winter in the southeast. And when I say abundant, I don't mean many, because it is quite rare to have one, but it is the second most frequent visitor. Its winter territory is the western US into northern Mexico and southern British Columbia. And these are some of the other birds that you might see in Tennessee in the winter. We have had all of these species in Tennessee at one time or another. The one in the top left-hand corner is an Allen's hummingbird, and they breed on a narrow strip of coastal California and in Oregon. I banded 3 of those in Tennessee in 2020, and one of them returned in 2021. The next bird in the right-hand upper corner is a broad-tailed hummingbird, and that breeds in the mountains of California to West Texas and into Mexico. Then the bottom left, that's the tiniest hummingbird we have in North America. That is the Calliope Hummingbird. And you'll find those in British Columbia and Washington, Idaho, Oregon and Nevada, California, and east into Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. The most recent one was banded right there in Memphis in January of 2021. The next bird in the middle there with the blue is a broad-billed hummingbird, and you find that bird, it breeds in southeast Arizona and throughout Mexico. And there was one of those in 2019, I believe, it might be 2018, that was photographed in Arlington, Tennessee, and the host didn't know that it was she was a beginning birder, and she didn't know that it was a rare occurrence. And I received the picture after the bird had left, but it became the first state record for Tennessee based on that picture and that observation. And then the last bird with the total pink head, that is an Anna's hummingbird. And they breed in southern British Columbia, southern Alaska, and Baja California, all the way to Texas. And all of the things that these birds have in common is that they have been in Tennessee in the winter since 1990. And then every once in a while, you get a really special visitor. And this is a Mexican violet ear. And this bird showed up in the height of the pandemic in July of 2020, right here in Clarksville, half a mile from my husband's office on Madison Street. And the host knew that this was a rare occurrence because she had grew up on the coast of Louisiana, where there are a lot of winter hummingbirds, and she contacted the local Audubon, and I'm a member, and one thing led to the other, and through a series of serendipitous events, I was able to go to her place and band the bird, and it was only the third occurrence of a Mexican violet ear in Tennessee forever. So it was an honor to be able to do that, but you never know what's going to show up if you leave up a feeder. And I'm the one to call if you get a strange bird at your feeder in Tennessee. So this is a map of, as you know, of Tennessee, and each one of those little spots indicates where there was a winter bird. A few spots, last year's 15 birds are missing from this. I haven't updated it yet, but there are, we have had over 330 winter hummingbirds in Tennessee since 1990 that have been banded and logged and are part of our winter hummingbird research. So this is, I told you that we had a little male Allen's hummingbird that returned, and this is his tail. He is an Allen's. This was a hatchier Allen's, an immature Allen's, and he was first photographed by the host, Mary Goodenough, on September 29th in 2020 at her house in Fayetteville, Tennessee. I found her through Facebook. I saw the picture of her bird and I contacted her, asked her if it would be okay if we came, and we traveled down there. And on the 8th of December, we banded this bird and we let it go, and it hung out on her yard for a couple days and left. And then on it was recaptured in Mobile Bay, Alabama on the 28th of December. So a month later, or not even a month, but 20 days later, the bird had flown from Fayetteville, Tennessee down to Mobile Bay, where Fred caught it and identified it by the band on its leg, called me, told me he had one of my birds. And then it disappeared, and then it was recaptured again 58 days later at that same home in Mobile. We had no idea where it went for those 58 days. Did it go down into Mexico? We don't know. And then lo and behold, on the 15th of August in 2021, Mary Goodenough called me and sent me a picture, and there was that bird again back in Fayetteville. And so it was very exciting, and it's the kind of research events that we look for. Don't happen often, but it helps it helps with our research, and it helps present a picture, and it's a pretty amazing adventure for this little bird. So now we're going to switch gears, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen hummingbird banding. There's a lot of festivals that take place. The biggest one is right there outside Memphis. You're lucky. It's the Strawberry Plains Audubon Hummer and Nature Festival that takes place in September, has for years. I'll be down there banding birds again with my crew. But this is how we do it. We have a cage, and inside the cage we hang a feeder. And because it's all about the food, the birds just freely fly in, and then we have a little remote control that we press the button and the door drops. And then we've captured the bird, and then we put the bird in these nice cotton soft bags, ventilated bags. We bring them over to the banding table. This just happens to be a host in Clarksville, where we were at yesterday, and she has a lot of birds, as you can see. And so first one in is first one served, and we band them. And the first thing we do when we take them out of the bag is we're going to try to tell, or I'm going to determine whether it's a male or a female. And in ruby throats, we do that by looking at the P6, or the primary sixth feather. Hummingbirds have 10 primary feathers. We simply count from the top down to number 6, and it's the shape. The one on the right is a female, the one on the left is a male. And the reason I have to determine if they're male or female is because they wear two different size bands. Because if you remember, I said male hummingbirds are smaller than females. And so you need to get the proper size band on the leg so that it fits properly and doesn't constrain or the bird at all. So that's how we do it. Of course, if it's an adult male with a red throat, we know right away what it is. But because females, hatchier females and hatchier males or juvenile males all look the same, we rely on this primary sixth feather to tell us the sex of the hummingbird. These are the bands. I make all the bands when they come from the bird banding lab, which is the organization that issues me my federal permit, and they issue me the bands. They come as a flat sheet that you can see on the left with all the numbers stamped on them. And then I have to strip them into 10, and then from there cut them for the species of hummingbirds that I'll be banding. And because every hummingbird wears a different size band. So, or every species wears a different size. So since I mostly band ruby throats, I'm making 5.6 millimeter bands for females and 5.4 millimeter bands for males. So I like to call it arts and craft for hummingbirds. And I mostly do it in the winter. Although this year I'm a little behind, so I'm making bands nightly so that we have enough to get us through this season.
Cyndi, I wanted to just let you know it's 7:35.
Okay, we're going. And then the next, these are the bands on the pin. That's the band. That's the band and the special pliers we have there. That's how we place it on the leg of the bird. That's what it looks like on the leg of the bird. It has a letter and 5 numbers. It's unique to each bird and will stay on that bird for the rest of its life. Then we take measurements such as the wing measurement and the tail. We're going to look at the bill because the bill is going to tell us the age of the bird. Babies have wrinkles, adults don't. And this is a baby bird at the top, adult bird at the bottom. Then we're going to blow on the bird and look for fat. And we talked about fat as being fuel. The picture on the right shows fat. It's a fluid-filled sort of blister that collects in different spots on the bird. The picture on the left is an actual egg that I can see in a bird when I'm banding a bird in the spring. And we call that bird gravid. And so, of course, we take copious notes and we send all our information to the bird banding lab, which is the repository for all bird banding records. So it's not just sitting with me, so other researchers can use it as well and learn from me. And then we let the bird go. And that's how we band them. I can do a bird about every 3 minutes when I'm at my research stations and not talking to folks, but just concentrating on the bird. And that's it. That's all I have. I'm done. And now we'll take any questions that anybody might have. Thank you for indulging. As you can tell, when I get going, I just get going. And I can talk about hummingbirds forever.
Oh, and it was just wonderful. Really, that was just an excellent presentation. And we have a bunch of questions, so I'm going to get started. Okay.
We'll go with it.
First, we'll get back to the tongue. What volume of nectar do the tongue tubes hold?
I don't know that anybody's measured the volume of it. It's a sip. It really truly is a sip. And in and out, a lot of times in a second. Be hard to measure.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, moving on. Any particular type of tree used for nests?
Not really. I mean, that we did. Worked on a nesting study with Dr. David Pitts, the ornithologist at UT Martin, and he looked at that. No, it all has to do with placement of the tree. They prefer that the branch hangs over an opening, whether that be water, a trail, yeah, so that they can approach it from below. And then it has to have that canopy over the top. I guess if we had to pick one, I think he said maple, but we really didn't find any rhyme or reason.
Interesting. How many miles does a hummingbird fly daily?
Daily can be anywhere from, if in migration, it can be 10 miles, 20 miles, 50 miles. Just depends on how much fat it's got, and where it wants to get to.
Okay. Why do they migrate to raise young instead of raising young in Central or South America? That's a great question.
That is a great question. Well, because this is home. So they come home to make babies. So this is their breeding territory. And so that's why they come back here. They are low man on the totem pole down in the tropics. There are lots of birds down there that are quite a bit bigger than they are, that don't migrate, that are residents. And so they're visitors in the winter down there. And they're really just down there to survive, to, find nectar, find insects.
Yeah, and I would also imagine that there's more prey available up here in the warm season, right? So the insects are available.
Mm-hmm. This is home. That's what I like to say. This is home. Mm-hmm. So it's like going on vacation in the winter.
Okay, here's a really good question. In my neighborhood, an organization maintains a feeding station for feral cats, which they attempt to catch, neuter, and release to the same area. Have you had any success in working with groups like this to get them to change their practices? All the science I see says that TNR, which is that practice, is a failure.
Yeah, no, I have had no success at all. And people much more influential than I have had no success. There is a group, there are people who believe that is humane. My personal opinion is that you're dooming them to death no matter what you do. Because cars, disease, people, it's not a happy life for any cat on the street. And I don't care if you set feeding stations up and feed them. No, because feral dogs find them, they fight among themselves. There's disease. They do vaccinate them when they neuter them, but they don't, continue to vaccinate them because they can't catch them again. I don't like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a contentious subject.
It is. And there are, it's like politics.
Yeah, it is. Okay, here's a easier question. Are there plants or flowers that we can plant in Memphis that will attract and sustain hummingbirds?
Yes, all those ones that I mentioned: salvia, columbine, bee balm, which is Monardia, salvia, buckeyes, you name it.
Native honeysuckle.
And native honey, coral honeysuckle. My suggestion is go to audubon.org or put a Google search in that says best plants for hummingbirds, and it should come up. And it's great because you can put in your actual zip code and they will list trees, bushes, and annuals, perennials that are just for your area. So, because you're going to plant something different, not what I will plant here, but maybe what somebody will plant in, Oregon or Pennsylvania, is not going to survive in Memphis because it's just too hot, so, and the vice versa too, that you're going to plant something not in Pennsylvania that you're going to put in Memphis because it's going to die over the winter. And, if it's a perennial in Pennsylvania. So look for, it's not just a blanket, I can give you families of flowers, but I can't tell you cultivars and certain ones that are going to be the best for an area. But I know that in Memphis, you can plant what I plant here: buckeye, cardinal flower, monardia, salvia, coral honeysuckle, trumpet vine, on and on. So.
Yeah. I think there's a website called Native Plant Finder, sponsored by either Audubon or National Wildlife Federation.
Yeah. The thing I like about the Audubon one is not only will it give you the name of a whatever bush, flower, tree, it'll tell you what species it will attract. So you can see other species that will come to it besides hummingbirds. So you're making a well-rounded yard for all species, not just, a monoculture.
Right. Okay, here's another question. How high do the hummingbirds fly on their journey across the Gulf? Do we have a sense of how they contend with weather?
Yeah. The weather bit, all birds are better weathermen than any weatherman on TV. They know, they can sense storms. They know when they're coming. We have put trackers on warblers, and they have made these crazy out of the way flights. And then we match it up with the weather and realize they were flying out of the way of a hurricane, or they know. But they get caught off guard too. So weather does have a big influence. If they have good tailwinds, they'll get across the Gulf faster. If they have headwinds, it'll take them longer. If they get caught in a storm, they're sunk. And they don't fly all that high. High enough to just keep out of the water.
Just above the water. So interesting. Sugar question. Can you use turbinado sugar?
No.
Okay. What is the length of a hummingbird's tongue?
It's 2.5 times the length of the bill. So it wraps, it comes all the way out, and when it goes in, it wraps around their skull, like a woodpecker. You can see it. You can see images online.
Okay. How do you catch these birds to put bands on them?
Well, that's what we talked about. They fly into a cage. You can use a mist net, which is it is literally a net. It looks like a gill net, a modified gill net with tiny little holes. I prefer not to use those because their shoulders get caught in them, and that's one of the most delicate parts of the bird, if you think of the motion. So we use those. They look like a big bird cage. They're wire cages that we have to make. You can't buy them anywhere. They're made. Everything is micro, mini, and handmade when it comes to a hummingbird. And
the question may be, I'm just guessing, I know that you reach into the cage with your hand and actually around the bird and bring it out.
Right. When the bird is inside, then the door is dropped, you go up to the cage, you put your hand in, and if you just make a cup with your hand and go to the bird, lots of times they fly right into your hand, and you just cup it and then you put it in the bag. Mm-hmm. And then there's ways that I have been trained to hold it so I don't hurt it or squish it when I take it out of the bag.
Right. Okay. Diane says, what a fabulous talk. If we find a winter bird, what is your number to contact you? And
okay.
Do the bands track them, or do they have to be captured to recognize a repeat visitor? That's a good.
Right. You have to either trap them again, or a lot of times I'm able to get a photograph of the bands. I have photographer friends who will sit and take with their big giant long lenses and take pictures of their legs, and we'll piece together the band, because I get 3,000 bands at a time. So I usually know that it's my span of bands if we can get most of the numbers. They do not track them. Hummingbirds are too little. It's coming, but it's not quite there yet. The general rule is you cannot place anything on a bird, whether you're a hummingbird or an ostrich, it has to weigh less than 3% of the average body weight of that species. So if the average body weight of a ruby throat is 3 grams, whatever you put on that bird has to be less than 3%. And right now we cannot get a battery, whether it's solar or not, small enough in a device to put it on a hummingbird. It's coming, We can do it on 7-gram birds, but not quite yet on hummingbirds.
Hmm.
And those bands that I do place on them, if you took 5,500 of them, you could put them in an envelope and put a first-class stamp on it and mail it. That's how lightweight they are.
That's so cool. And how do people contact you if they see a winter bird?
Oh, you can go to southeasternavianresearch.org and contact me that way.
Okay. Maybe you have a slide with that information, but that's okay.
It was the beginning.
Okay, never mind. Where is this festival in September? I can actually answer that. It's
Holly Springs, Mississippi.
It's a Strawberry Plains Audubon Center is what you.
Right, and it is, this year, it is a Saturday and Sunday only. It is always the weekend after Labor Day.
Okay, and here is our last question, and absolutely the most important. What is the best way to clean a feeder?
Okay, well, if you are changing your nectar and cleaning your feeders every day, all you have to do is rinse them with warm water. Don't use soap. Soap attaches itself to the feeders, and eventually you get a residue. If you have to use soap, use Dawn, Blue Dawn, because they have found, rehabbers, you can get oil and stuff off birds and it doesn't harm them. Soak them in hot water, 1 part bleach to 10 parts water. There are some people who say don't use bleach, but when you're using that minimal amount, it will kill the mold. But the important part is rinsing, 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 and letting air dry before you refill. Okay. So you can do the same thing with white vinegar. But again, it's all about rinsing, 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 rinsing.
Are those little brushes for the
Yep.
spout helpful? Do you believe in those?
I do. Bottle brushes work good if you can't get your hand inside to clean the inside. Eyelash brushes, tiny little brushes. Just be careful with plastic reservoirs, because if you scrub too vigorously, you scratch the plastic, and that's a perfect place for mold spores to take hold.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. All right, we have exhausted the questions. Those were wonderful questions, everyone. And I want to promise everyone out there that we will send Cyndi's or the best contact information for SEER in our email to you when we send the link to this program.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
You can also, if you want, give them my personal email, routledges@bellsouth.net. I hear from people all the time there on there. It's no big deal.
Okay. We will do so. Cyndi, that was just the most wonderful talk. I mean, I would like to listen to you for another hour. You just are so
I can go on and on forever. My family was like, shut up, that's enough.
No, it's really great. And I thank you so much for doing this again for us. And I know that we will be asking you back one of these days.
All right. Hopefully, this COVID stuff will go away and we can come and be in person.
Yeah.
And talk to folks that way. So
that would be great. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. You can always check out our activity calendar for upcoming events. Our next lecture will be on snakes. I think it's August 24th. Check me on that. And everyone, please have a wonderful evening. Thank you again, Cyndi. It was really,
thanks.
really great. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cyndi, thank you. Thank you.